We all know that Rome was a strange place. After all, people went everywhere dressed in togas, slept with their sisters, and spent their free time watching Russell Crowe fight tigers. But what most of us don't know is just how evil this place was. And it doesn't mean just emperors and their concubines. Everyday life in ancient Rome was a relentless orgy of prostitution, child, and eventually orgies. After all, even the most direct and conservative Roman could appreciate it. Some of the most famous Roman emperors were evil, megalomaniacs, or just plain crazy. Caligula and Nero's bizarre obsessions have made them household names. But these stories have always raised a difficult question. If these emperors were really so deranged, how did they come to be rulers of one of the greatest empires the world has ever known? The most scandalous stories about the emperors of Rome must be taken with a grain of salt. Ancient historians often curried favor with a new emperor by slandering the ancients. Furthermore, the emperors themselves had every incentive to claim that the mad emperors of the past were Rome's biggest problem, rather than the imperial system. However, the rule of the craziest emperors highlights major flaws in the Roman system, including the fact that it relied on a succession system that rarely rewarded the best rulers. It also includes good gossip. In today's video, we are going to tell you some reasons why ancient Rome was a pervert's paradise. But before we get into the video, make sure you subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update. Let's get started. Pederasty. When talking about an ancient culture, it's important to remember that their standards will always be very different from ours. So when we say that the Romans practiced pedophilia, we must take into account that it was quite acceptable at that time. It's only when we think about it from our own cultural perspective that everything seems a little bit. In Rome, there was no exact age of consent. If you were in a same-sex relationship with a freeborn male, you would have to wait until he was at least 12 years old. But when it came to slaves, anything goes, and usually it did. In addition to the Warren Cup, the teachers liked to entertain young children. Then there are the numerous laws published on the subject, preserved to this day, to prevent this practice from spreading to normal life. In fact, this pedophilia was so widespread that Romans who didn't like young children were generally considered a bit weird, a belief that only died out when Christianity finally took hold. Mass infanticide. Some of us may wonder how the Romans handled so much before the birth of the pill. Well, as the story goes, they simply redefined the term abortion to a terrifying degree. All Roman birth control was useless. All unwanted pregnancies had to have gone somewhere. And that part was apparently the dump. There is a lot of evidence to suggest that Roman mothers just casually dropped their newborns. From old letters defending this practice to hints that abandoned babies may have been a major source of slavery, all signs point to a culture totally comfortable with mass infanticide. Slave. It's no secret that Roman society was based on slavery. Men and women captured during military conquests were shipped across the empire and auctioned off to the highest bidder, after which they became the property of one aristocrat or another. And these aristocrats usually had only one thing in mind when buying a young slave. Slaves had absolutely no rights under Roman law. They were part of the furniture, no better than the objects that surrounded them. And just as it's technically impossible to have an affair with your library, Roman law didn't consider slave to be infidelity. So when Augustus outlawed adultery in 31 BC, the excited Romans did what any addict would do and began abusing their slaves at an unprecedented rate. Gender and even age were not barriers at that time. Public. In 50 BC, you would find yourself completely surrounded by penises. Literally every available surface in the empire was printed with images of penises. You do not believe me? There's a Roman coin depicting sodomy and a once outdoor statue of the god Pan having intercourse with a goat. Thanks to their complex ideas about the gods and fertility, the Romans literally had no trouble seeing their neighbors' sausages, and that's actually better. Housewives used tiny metal penises as wind chimes, Well-hung slaves were forced to display theirs at all times, and images of the fertility god Priapus weighing his own body appeared on doorways gigantic member as a form of good luck. And that's before we even get to the murals that filled bathhouses and depicted every sexual partner imaginable. But there were not only frescoes and statues. The Romans were also masters at it. X-rated gravestones. As you may have gathered, no aspect of Roman life was far removed from thoughts of coitus, and that included death. Unlike our rare epitaphs, Roman men and women included full biographies on their tombstones, detailing every little moment of their lives. And since their lives were often quite debauched, these were X-rated tombstones. One in particular is famous for describing in great detail a threesome relationship between two men and a woman, including rave reviews about the woman's nipples and how punctual she was about her hair treatment. Religious parties. Imported from Greece, Bacchanalia were fertility festivals that actually spread to modern southern Italy. And rightly so, they dedicated themselves almost exclusively to as many people as humanly possible. These festivals were meant to be places where people came together, danced to ecstasy, and then fell into frenzied copulation without caring who or what they might sleep with. It's not just Livy going on a fantasy trip. Obviously, the authorities were so disturbed by this practice that they banned it, and severe torture penalties were imposed on anyone who continued to practice it. This is Rome at the height of its decline, so anything they want to ban as immoral has to be pretty extreme. Yet despite the threat of torture to his followers, the cult of Bacchus survived for centuries, along with its perverse and orgiastic rites. Perverted justice. According to history, both the Romans and the Greeks were experts in unusual punishments. Not all the time, but in case of adultery, it is absolutely true. Basically, if you were a Roman and someone slept with your wife, you would have the legal right to sodomize them in return, with public if you wish. It's not as crazy as it seems. Despite their youthful love, the Romans were a deeply masculine lot. There was literally nothing more embarrassing for a man than playing a feminine role in. So buggering someone would be the ultimate act of revenge, branding them unmanly for life. But even in the context of Roman society, this punishment sometimes took a strange turn. Apparently, it was not uncommon for the offended person to sodomize his rival with a radish, rather than his own equipment. And that's all for today. Let us know your views in the comments section below, and do not forget to like this video before leaving. Thanks for watching.